Okay, so next I want to go into the actually introducing you to Fusion 360. Now, hopefully you've been able to sort that all out on your computers. If not, that's the reason we're recording this. So first thing is I did put together a introductory glossary of terms and tools that will relate specifically to this first project. And we're going to address this stuff as well as it relates into Fusion. So let me change over my screen and we'll talk about this. So just some basic terms. Again, these are introductory terms. We'll be expanding on this as we go through the semester, but just to not overwhelm you with a dictionary of relative terms. We just went over what CAD and CAM are. CAD, computer-aided design, CAM, computer-aided manufacturing. There you go. So some basic stuffs, and one thing I do recommend, if you are able to, I recommend getting a mouse for your computer. The touchscreen is ample, but the first things you'll see is zoom and pan and such, all related to combination keystrokes and mouse functions. So if you are able, navigating your software will be much easier with a mouse. You don't need a smart mouse. A very painfully basic two click or 3-click mouse wheel will work just fine. You don't have to have one, but it is very helpful. So the first thing is in Fusion, zooming. You can of course do it with commands, but also with your mouse key, with your mouse wheel, zooming in and out. Pan, which is grabbing the screen and moving the whole thing around. You're not orbiting, but you're panning, taking your sheet and moving it left, right, up and down in any combination. That is panning. That is holding the mouse wheel and moving. There's a function in Fusion. Rotate, tumble, or orbit, however you want to discuss it. That is on a mouse wheel, hold shift and move the scroll. So they're multi-functions, but very similar. And again, I'll show you how to also do that in Fusion. You don't have to have that. As I said, on this glossary term, just direct glossary terms are in black. Things that have correlating commands, I've tried to color code into blue. So as we discussed before, sketch is your basic 2D drawing terminology. A sketch refers to a two-dimensional drawing, exactly that then you will manipulate to create a three-dimensional body, three-dimensional form. We're going to get into this as well, but there are, of course, correlating definitions to different types of objects within Fusion and any CAD software. So your sketches are the drawing, your two-dimensional aspects. Bodies are created by extruding those two-dimensional sketches into three-dimensional forms. So a sketch is 2D, a body is 3D, as I said here. Now, jumping over, because I should have relisted this, I did it in alphabetical order, but probably should have jammed a couple together. The other aspect is component. And essentially, if we are noting as a hierarchy, your component is the highest part. Because within components can be items like bodies. And a body usually is consisted of a sketch. There's other things we can add in later that will be referential, things like how to make things move, like joints, and all kinds of other stuff. But we don't need to worry about that right now. It's just more of the hierarchy is that a component will contain bodies and sketches, but at the same time, a component can also have nested inside of it other components, which then can have their own bodies and sketches. The reason for this is how Fusion interacts between different objects, different components to make something move, a joint, something like that, which is like literally making something move, as it's like whether or not you actually have like a screw in that place or like a pin or whatever the function is, doesn't matter. It has to be between two different components. So those can each have their own sketches, their own bodies, all that such. That's all. But anyway, just note that the hierarchy is the component is the highest. It is consisted of bodies and sketches, but a component can have nested components that can then have their own bodies and sketches and such. Make a lot more sense working with it. All right, and then chamfer is a corner that basically takes a 45-degree chop off of that, makes a flat edge. Line, and on the keyboard, L refers to, like I said, just a line segment, and on a sketch, it's literally a line. It can be multi-lines, whatever. It can be curves. That's technically a different thing, but a line is just a straight line. There'll be different types of lines. There'll be construction lines, which are denoted by a dotted line or by dotted lines. These are so that way you can make reference lines in your drawing. Say, like, I want to put multiple things on a line, but I don't want the line to interact with anything. So I can make a construction line and then say, like, make a bunch of circles along that construction line and not have the construction line itself interact. Dimension refers to the actual length of any of the stuff. So whether or not whatever you set it as, dimension refers to, all right, that's 2 inches. That one's 1 inch. That one's, I don't know, 1.5 inch, 1.5 inches. Those are your dimensions. Extrude, like I said, is taking a sketch, squishing it out like a Play-Doh extruder tool, and that's literally making a 3-dimensional object from a 2-dimensional sketch. Face, we'll deal with this stuff later, but it refers to a, like, of an object, say a 3-dimensional object here. Virtual 3-dimensional cube. It is kind of, but not interchangeable with surface. A face is, a cube has 6 faces. 3 you see, the 3 you don't. A cylinder has 3 faces. I mean, I don't know lines here. We'll draw it inside of that. Top, bottom, and the whole circular side. That's how that works. It's not being a smart ass thing. Technically that's 4. There's the inside. Not in this term. And fillet is the other cornering tool. Is, like I said, fillet is of fish. Fillet is on a curve or on a set of lines or on a 3-dimensional object. It is actually rounding over something based off of a virtual radius that is a point between there. So that say that curve is, like, I don't know, 0.5 inch radius. Actually, that would be a foot. So there we go. We're gonna get this. We're gonna talk about some other. We're gonna talk as the actual place. Gimbal, gumball, whatever you want to call it, will be a kind of center point tool. Plane refers to virtual planes, like your tape, like essentially thinking in terms of a tabletop right in front of you, stuff like that. We'll get to that. Polyline and project are different tools we're going to use. Timeline is going to refer to the actual timeline of parametric modeling that Fusion can function as. Like I said, you can actually go back and forth in the timeline. UV grid system and these axes are what we're going to be talking about, different planes and axes. Now, I have color-coded these because that is what they look like. Within Fusion and really any CAD software, you're going to have your major axes, X, Y, and Z. These colors refer to how they actually are visually represented, and this is pretty universal. It's not just being X, Y, Z. Hey, your zipper's down. It is X, Y, and Z, although funny enough, Z is up and down. So there you go, you weren't far off. X is the X-axis, left and right. That refers to the same thing if you were like running a milling machine, which makes machines flat things. X is left and right each time. Y is front and back. Z is up and down. Okay, but what if I turn the object upside down? Still going to be the same things. It refers to the original orientation of your workspace. You would build objects around what is called the origin. Right smack in the middle. It is the center point of all these axes. Also, you have your planes. Like I said, it's basically a virtual workspace. But in this case, plane refers to the multiple virtual faces that are created by the different axes. So you could have an XZ plane that would be like working right in front of you. the XY plane. Since this whole thing would be X, then X. And going backwards would be Y. That virtual workspace would be XY. It's like working on a tabletop. Back into the side, back into up, which would be kind of like working side to side, would be your XY or YZ, or sorry, ZY, or really YZ, because usually your X and Y's are first, but that doesn't matter. So that's what those refer to. And this is color coordinated to how these actually work in Fusion 360, as well as a lot of other CAD software. So that's what that means here. And the reason I say usually X is left and right, usually Y is in and out, usually Z is up and down, because what if you're looking at the object and you tumbled it upside down to work underneath it or something like that? It's still going to have the same original directions, but they're obviously going to change depending on how you are viewing it. And then down here, there's some hotkeys. We'll get into all of this as we actually work with the thing. So with that in mind, let's quit talking about it and actually work with Fusion. So if you haven't already, open up Fusion, as I remember how to change screens. This is the workspace you're going to see. Now, by default, you're going to have this whole big, wide open grid. That is a virtual grid, and as you zoom in and out, or further out, you'll see that it has an edge to it. That is just the starting point. If I build something that's larger, the grid will expand with what I'm working on. So let's work our way through just what I'm seeing here. And unfortunately, the Zoom window will obscure some stuff. Starting from top left, this is going to be your data panel. Click on that, and you will see your team drop down. You will have your single user storage, your personal account. Later tonight, hopefully tonight, I will be sending team invites for our shared 3D, our BSU 3DM 3D modeling team. You will have your own stuff. You will have our shared team stuff. You can save on yours. You can save on the team stuff. Now, the only way I'm going to be able to see stuff, your file, your work, is if it's on the shared file. And our actual folder is the 2023 spring work, and I will have a folder for each of the assignments. So in this folder, here's an example. We'll get to that. On your own, you can create different folders, different projects is what it's for, whatever. One thing about that is, once you make them, you can alter them, but you cannot delete projects. I don't know why. Whatever. You can delete, change, and move file folders. So just know that that's a thing. So drop back and forth between that. You can also upload and make new folders, all of that. Don't make new folders on the shared team. I'll be handling all that. Open and close that with a little X. Next over is your standard file stuff. And that's exactly what it is, standard file stuff. New design, specifically electronics and all that such. We're not going to get to that. New drawing, you can do that. That's something else. And that is defined as a drawing, not a sketch. Remember that drawing is an actual, much more of a full layout of a design. Sketch is just the starting line designs. We're going to get into that. You can make more. You can make more projects and such. Just if you look over this tab, just like a lot of current web browsers. Oops, I didn't mean to hit the X. Meant to hit the plus sign. New design. You can start new projects that way. Now, a quick thing about saving files. You can save a file, but as you open this, you do not need to save multiple versions of your project. Like I said, Fusion is a cloud-based storage system. The cool thing about Fusion is, and we're going to get into how to navigate this stuff, but if you look at like this project here that I started, example, Jedi badge, there's this little V1 next to it. Open that up. The more, every time I save this project, and once you start saving it, actually, the actual intended save, so save early, save often, Fusion will automatically save, so if it crashes, you won't lose all your work. But get in the habit of, at least, you start a new project, save it, actually make a title, all of that stuff for it. You will be able to go back and forth through older iterations, not just through as you work. There'll be a timeline here. as you work, it'll expand, but you will go through older iterations. So you don't have to make your own multiple different files. It will save it for you, and you can go back and forth through different versions. And eventually, when you have more versions, more save points, I'll show you how to navigate into actually accessing old versions and restarting. So you start something, I want to make some alterations, but I'm not sure if I like the way this project is going to go. Obviously, you can make a split and make a second one, but because the way that Fusion is set up, because Fusion is designed around the whole cloud storage, so it can be worked on, like a single project can be worked on by different team members. It's so you can access all the different versions of one project. So it's really cool like that, but we'll talk about how to work that later. So you don't need to make different files to save different versions. You can just keep saving the same one and go back to the other ones. All right. This first button here, design, don't worry about changing this right now. We're pretty much just going to be working in the design workspace, and that's through actually designing stuff. There's different stuff, and we're going to talk about a little bit of it, but there we go. Now, you'll have different tabs here, but you'll see that unlike a lot of programs, there's not many tools in the interface. Fusion is designed around having a changing intuitive interface so that it will bring up the corresponding tools to what you're working on. So if you're working on solids, here's all your predetermined solids. Like I said, with object-based modeling, you have a drop-down as well of a bunch of different ones, and you'll see some pre-assigned hotkeys. If you mouse over any of these, you see this vertical ellipses, these 3 dots. You can right-click on that and add it both to the toolbar and your shortcuts. I'll show you how to find the shortcuts in a moment. Actually, you just press S, shortcuts. It'll bring up a search tool. And there you go. And on that, one of the things about Fusion is what it also does is for each tool you access, it brings up a new pop-up toolbox window. So sometimes it can get a little cluttered, but just be aware of that. So you have a bunch of tools here. It has all the relative ones, creating stuff, automate, we're not going to get to this semester, and modify. So like I said, through object-based modeling, you can create predetermined shapes, modify those, glue them together, all that kind of stuff. That's how you create stuff. Surface modeling, you'll see a lot of the same tools, a lot of different ones, a lot of the same creations, but not all the same tools because these are relative to surface. Mesh, we're not going to get to. Sheet metal, you can actually design in Fusion like things that are intended to be like folded out of flat sheet metal and made into stuff. Pretty cool. Plastics, all that kind of stuff. Different things. But we're basically going to stay in the solid workspace for now. But say you want to enter more of, like I said, parametric modeling, sketch-based modeling. If you click the create sketch, which is what we're going to do, first you select the plane you want to work on. And as I said here with the axes, you'll see the X is going left to right, but because it's in perspective, kind of going diagonal, Y is going diagonal, Z is up and down. You decide the workspace. I'm going to pick the XY plane. That's a flat workspace. Now, all of my tools change. These are all sketching tools. So that's how Fusion works. It changes the interface depending on what you want to do. When I finish doing my drawings, I'll hit finish sketch. Now down at the bottom, you'll see a little sketch tool has appeared. You can access that. As you add more to it, you can go back in time, access that either by right-clicking the button or double-clicking on it, and it'll bring you back into the sketch interface where you can modify anything like that, finish sketch, change it again. All right. So that's your basic. Those are your basic toolbars, how that works. Obviously, there's a bunch of drop downs. I recommend you just open them up and just see what they look like, see what they do. Moving from over to the other side, at the top, you have your help button. Of course, that's help. You can also access your account through the little silhouette picture, and that you open that up, and that would open up the web browser and actually bring you to the Autodesk website, and you could access your account, stuff like that through there. Easy peasy. All right. How do you navigate this? Like I said, we briefly talked about like orthogonal views, looking at something directly, not in perspective, but directly as an object. But this is all in perspective. How to operate this is, like I said, you have some keys which you can use either as a mouse. So if you do have a mouse with a scroll wheel, zoom in and out, rolling the mouse. You can pan by grabbing or pressing the third wheel, moving back and forth. You can orbit by holding down shift. and then change around. You'll see that my cursor changes each time to relative to the motion. The other thing is floating here in the upper right hand corner is your view cube. Because this is all in perspective, you can grab the view cube and just holding down left click, and I can drag it around, and you can see how a couple things happen. Obviously, it's tumbling all around. Also, you'll see this thing that says pivot point in the center there. And it's not really in the center, but it has shown up. There's nothing relative in the sketch or in the design right now to grab onto, but if you select something and then orbit around, the model will orbit around relative to what you have selected. Or you can select one of the faces, say like right. Now I'm looking at my project orthogonally straight on, and you can see that the x-axis, the red line, is no longer visible. That's because I'm looking at this from this perspective. So all I can see is the y-axis going left and right, and the z-axis going up and down. Right in the center, that's my origin point. That little like BMW symbol. That's my origin point. We're going to talk about how to work with that in a moment, but that is basically the virtual center of your work environment. It is best to build objects relative to that, because that locks it in place and they don't really get lost in your virtual space. You don't have to, but you can. To change around, again, grab and tumble, or you can move around by selecting even the edges of something of the view cube, or as you mouse over it, you'll see that new things appear. I have arrows that snap to different views, or rotating arrows that allow me to rotate the drawing. There's nothing there to orient it, so it kind of gets a little confusing. The other thing is little home symbol. That's why this is called the home cube, or the view cube and the home button. Hit that, it snaps it back to default 3-point perspective, which you can equally view X, Y, and Z planes and axes as normal. To navigate as well, going down to the center bottom, this is how you can navigate without a mouse and a wheel. So from the side, or from the left, you see the orbit tool. I click that. Now my cursor has rotating arrows kind of in a circle going up and around, and round and around from left to right, side to side, that sort. Now I can click and drag around. Same thing I could do by clicking and dragging the view cube. To get out of that, hit escape. Escape is basically going to be the get out of the current tool for everything. Moving over, you have look at. That allows you to zoom into an object. There's nothing there to zoom into. Next move over is pan, the little hand. Grab around, clicking and dragging, now moves the whole project up, down, left, right, and however variation there. Hit escape. Next move over, zoom, brings over. Now if I click and drag up and down, it zooms in and out. Next move over, fit is if there's something here, I can click on it and it'll explode that up to fill the screen, just to zoom in on the actual object. Next stuff over is, oops, come on, go away. Problem with Zoom is the tools get in the way of what I'm trying to do. Next thing over is, now it disappears. These are your display settings. These are all going to be your preferences, essentially. So clicking on that, visual style just changes. There's no object in here to see right now, but tell you what, let's throw down like a cube right in the center. I'm just clicking and dragging dimensions. Now I'm going to drag it up, and you see as I created something, I can either enter things numerically or with the arrows, little toolbox comes up, click OK. All right, now there's at least something there to see. All right, so right now the default visual style is shaded with only visible edges. I can click shaded alone. It does not highlight the edges. I can see the faces. I mouse over the faces, it highlights the current face. Click on the face, and it further highlights it. I'm not going to go through all of these. Hidden edges allows you to see through the object. So like I was saying, you can see this both as a wire form, as a wireframe object, and as a solid simultaneously. Personally, I like to keep it as shaded with visible edges. It keeps me from getting completely confused at what I'm looking at, but it also highlights the edges, so it just makes it a little bit clearer.
Other stuff on here, you have your environment. Photo booth is the default. You can change things like gray sky if you want to, like if you're working at night and your screen is still not dark enough or whatever. That's away. Gray room, more stuff like that. It's basically that kind of stuff. Blue, whatever. Your preference. Again, these are just preferential viewing methods. Other stuff we don't need to deal with. Visibility we might look into later. Effects, we don't really need to deal with any of this stuff. Those are your main ones, of visual style and environment. It's just your preference on how you're actually seeing the thing. Sometimes we'll toggle visual styles just because depending on how we're modeling, some things become a little bit easier to work with. Other thing is the grid preference. So that is your virtual grid. You can turn on things like snap to grid when you're drawing things, when you're building things. Your cursor will automatically snap to vertex points on this grid. So as you zoom in, you can see that it just infinitely recursively creates more finer grid. But as you're building stuff, your model will snap to the major vertex points, the cross points of that stuff. And you can turn those off and on, and you can also set increments. We'll talk about that still later. The other thing I wanted to show you is viewpoints. Now you can toggle this by pressing Shift and 1 or Shift and exclamation. I don't know why it does that. But like I said, the default viewing for Fusion 360 is this orbitable perspective. But if I change that, this brings up the more traditional drafting style, or that's more universal in a lot of other CAD software, orthogonal views. So I'm looking at this object, the default to the top, to the front, to the right or left. Usually it's right. It's just because that's the way it lays out, and this perspective. So if you like to work this way, more power to you. I have adapted to working through the perspective view, but some things work better in orthogonal view, because that way, as you're making like complex moves, meaning like you're not just moving something XY, you're moving something also through the Z dimension. Sometimes it's easier to see things from different ways. That's all. All right. And like I said, finally at the bottom here, you have your history recorder. That's going to be where, as you make more changes and such, you can move back and forth. But you could also, like I said, move back and forth by actually dragging your cursor here, and it'll snap back to, like, there's no drawing there. But as we do something more complex, you can move back and forth by hitting the play and fast forward and fast forward and next buttons. That just allows you, to just toggle through history. Last thing is your browser, or I like to call it the hierarchy tree, whatever you prefer. It says browser right there, so we probably should just call it browser. First thing is, like I said, components. Component symbol is that cube. And that is where you would save your project. So when I go to save it, either hitting the save icon, Control or Command save, that you can bring stuff up. So example basic, I'm just putting something in. I hit save. This is already going to put it in the folder that I'm working in. Now it changes the title of the top and the title of my browser here. Moving down, you have your document settings. Now, this is where you can change units and such. The default setting is millimeters. I recommend staying in millimeters. If you're unfamiliar with millimeters, maybe start familiarizing yourself. I have a bunch of little 6-inch rulers that also have metric side. It's a good way to, at least if you're really only familiar with Imperial, that way you at least have that reference guide. But most 3D printers, as well as the intermediary software that takes your 3-dimensional model and preps them for 3D printers, usually called slicer programs. We're going to do it later. Most of that default language for those is millimeters. Often I run into it when I build something in inches, there's often a scaling issue. So not that if I built this in inches and changed it to millimeters, it'll stay the exact same size. It'll just be a different unit within Fusion. But when I take that model
that I built in inches and I take it to a 3D printer, sometimes it completely throws off the scale. I don't know why, but that's just something I have personally run into. So I really recommend staying in millimeters. Plus, you don't have to deal with like fractions and any crap like that. You can just say, yeah, it's 1.1. We're done here. So just my personal preference. You do what you want to do. Next thing down, your views. That's just, again, the top right. You can rename them if you like. I don't know. Origin, there's a little eyeball next to it that's grayed out, or rather the other one are with a slash through it. The other ones are solid. The origin comes up. That's what I originally built my cube on, right there in the center. Let me hide that by toggling the eyeball. There's my origin right in the center, has the axes and the correlating planes that you can see through. You select those to create new sketches, objects, whatever. You can open this up when I have multiple bodies. You can have multiple bodies. You can rename them, either slow click or right click and go to rename. That will certainly help you keep things organized. Same thing for sketches. Open up the sketch. You can change your sketches. I haven't actually created this, or I haven't actually done anything on a sketch. I just created it. There you go. If I create more components, we'll just say a basic one. Oh, I keep hitting combine. New component, we'll say just, because I'm going to create a new one. When I create a new one, you see it appears down here. Now the very top browser component has changed the symbol from a single cube to what looks like a stack of cubes, because that's exactly what it is. If the symbol for one component is one cube, more components is more cubes. That's all. And my original component has now ghosted out. And I now inside of this, you'll see an origin, and it can have its own set of all the things too. So that's pretty much the rundown. All right. So with that, you can navigate throughout. Just note that also the one thing okay, this is ghosted out. How do I get back? If you look for the right of this component, there's now a little dot. That is your activation point. If I go back up to the top, you see it's a circle with no dot in it. Select there. That now activates everything in the project. All components, all nested stuff. There you go. So if I had more, I can see everything, or I can cycle to one component that then has all its own nested stuff. There you go. So that's the basic navigation. Main thing is play around. We're going to be basically working with just the solids. We're going to play around with the surfaces later this semester, but for the most part, solids, and then bringing up the sketch environment to create sketches. So hopefully that actually helps, and you'll be able to start stuff.